So we've got Chicago, Dallas, Jacksonville, Las Vegas, New Orleans, and the Jets. Now, we're not going to go through all of those, but I'm just kind of looking at those, John, just trying to think now. If you're a Chicago guy, Mike McCarthy, do you like the idea of the Chicago Bears possibly hiring him after he just got released from the Dallas Cowboys?
No.
Oh.
He's not a terrible fit, Pete,
Yeah.
but I would rather see Pete Carroll, your old buddy. Because Pete and Pete Carroll were together with the Vikings folks. I would rather see him, Pete, because I liked what he did in Seattle. I believe he had both roles, coach and GM for a while, Pete.
Yep.
And he built he built that franchise up to where, nobody wanted to play Seattle. It's like they were Detroit. I think he could do that in Chicago, Pete. So McCarthy, would you take him? Sure. And he'd be anybody'd be lucky to have Caleb Williams unless we've all screwed up on who he really is. And I don't think we have. I think it was just like we said about the Vikings offensive line. If it's a jailbreak and he led the league in sacks, Pete, Caleb Williams, I think it was 67 or 68 sacks. That means you got no time to throw. Right. So you can't take advantage of his skills. I think Pete Carroll will address that better than Mike McCarthy, Pete.
So Dallas, maybe it's Deion Sanders. Jacksonville, it's probably Ben Johnson, which is probably a good fit, I think. He's the offensive coordinator at Detroit. He's been dealing with his own quarterback, obviously, Detroit, who's been absolutely magical this year. I mean, he's by far his best year, and he looks fantastic. Vegas, who knows? Maybe it's Brian Flores from the Vikings. He's the defensive coordinator, but he's kind of toxic. I'm not going to get into all that, but there's a lot of reasons why there are probably teams that will interview him. I don't know whether or not they'll hire him or not. But you've got Joe Brady. You've got, Aaron Glenn, as we talked about, the defensive coordinator, maybe going to the Jets. I think if you're going to the Jets, you almost have to get somebody who's more on the offensive coordinator side, I think. And so maybe they go with the Baltimore Ravens, offensive coordinator. He's an older guy, but that's okay. I think in the NFL.
Or do they go with McCarthy, Pete? Do the Jets go with McCarthy?
Yeah. I don't think McCarthy would be a bad choice. I didn't even think about that till you just said it, John, but that's not bad. It's interesting to see how the coaching carousel spins, right? And now all of a sudden we're going to really start to see some of the hires because a lot of guys have already done the interview process. It's the only thing that might bother me a little bit about Detroit going in against the Commanders, John, is, your D coordinator, O coordinator flying all over the country doing these interviews. Does that kind of get in the way or not? I don't know. I mean, it happens every year. I get it. But when you're a playoff team and you got the home field advantage, you don't want to have too many distractions going on, I don't think either. Do you?
No, I don't think you want those distractions. But I'll throw another distraction your way, Pete. I think Jerry Jones buys out Belichick's contract. It's $10 million buyout, folks. Yeah. $10 million just to be able to negotiate with him to make him your coach. I think he pays that, Pete. That's chump change for Jerry these days, Pete. He makes that basically over the weekend on the interest on his money. So I think he buys out. By the way, I loved him on Landman, Pete. Jerry on Landman. That was a great episode.
That was.
Where he comes in and visits John Hamm in the hospital. Classic. But I think, Pete, Jerry Jones says, I'm going to spend this money. I'm not going to die with it. I'm going to spend it. And I'm going to get the 8-time Super Bowl champ coach that, and I'm going to let him date our cheerleaders. Because I think Belichick's kind of got an eye for the younger chicks, Pete.
That's not, you think? I'll tell you what, I don't think that's crazy at all. Matter of fact, we've heard already from Tom Brady saying, hey, look, we want him with the Las Vegas Raiders, and we're willing to buy out what he has at North Carolina, too. This could work out pretty well for North Carolina, quite frankly, because if they've got somebody in their sights outside of Belichick and they get all this money, that could be a nice payday for North Carolina as well. So that makes it pretty interesting. All right, John, how about the next one? So who is the next team in the NFL that has the best chance of turning it around the way the Washington Commanders did? Because let's think about this for just a second. In 2023, the Commanders were 4-13. It's why they got the second pick in the draft. And what did they do with it? Well, first of all, they hired Cliff Kingsbury, one of those quarterback gurus and coaches and all the rest of that. You've got Dan Quinn as the head coach. He's a defensive guy. And this year, all of a sudden, what did they do? They drafted him. Well, they finished out 12-5, and now they're going to be playing the Detroit Lions, right? So that's not such a bad turnaround in a very short piece of time with 4 wins, and now you've got 12 wins. I don't know. I'd love to go back and see, is this one of the biggest turnarounds ever or not? Because it's got to be pretty close. By the way, with Jaden Daniels, John, they're number 7 in offense, they're number 3 in rushing, and they're number 5 in points scored. I would say that one draft pick in the second pick of the draft was the most genius one of the entire draft, because they got the guy they wanted, and they knew the ability that he had to be very consistent and run the ball pretty well. I don't think they wanted to run it as much as he did, but he makes it a lot different game for sure. So I just wonder, who do you think? And it's probably somebody who needs a coach, right? Is it Chicago? Is it Dallas? Is it Jacksonville? Is it the Raiders? Is it New Orleans? Is it the Jets? I don't know, but they're all looking for a coach. That tells me they had a pretty crappy year. So who do you think can make that kind of a turnaround this year?
Well, when you're picking on teams with bad records like that, I'd say the Bears.
Okay.
And, you know, I know it's a homer call, but
No.
they're 2 offensive linemen away, Pete, from having a great team,
Yeah.
I think.
Mhm.
And that could be free agent as well as draft. And it should be both, by the way.
Mhm.
But one of the teams that I would think could really hurt people is the LA Chargers,
Mhm.
because of Harbaugh, and Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, sooner or later, somebody's going to give one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL a real team around him. I know he's been to the big game, but like you said, Pete, so was Marino, and he never went back.
Yeah.
So if you want to waste a generational talent like Joe Burrow, just keep doing what you're doing, Cincinnati. But if you give that guy some pieces around him other than Chase, Pete, and, you know, his offensive side, he's okay. He does need a lineman or 2 as well, just like Chicago. But that defense was horrific there.
Terrible.
Pete. And,
Yeah.
you know, they need to address that ASAP.
Yep. Defense is their problem. Absolutely 100%. They're absolutely awful. I know, I'm pretty sure that they already fired the defensive coordinator, so they're going to probably do something about that as well. I'm going to go with the Dallas Cowboys, and here's why. I know they had 7 wins. That's fine, right? But that's not good enough. They didn't get anywhere, and that's a problem when you've got Dak Prescott that you've put a hell of a lot of money into. You've got CeeDee Lamb. You put a hell of a lot of money into him. You've got Cooks. You've got I think a pretty damn good offensive line. Can they get better? Sure. There was enough sacks that they've got to do something else. On the defensive side, they've got a good couple of corners. They got Micah Parsons, who's basically the closest thing to Lawrence Taylor that we've seen. I don't think he's as good as Lawrence Taylor, but he's damn close. They need a running back. As I evaluate the Dallas Cowboys, tell me who their running back is. I couldn't tell you, John. I don't know who the hell it is. They were bringing back old guys and trying to run them through there. Go to Alabama. Go to in free agency. If any of those Alabama running backs are available, I'm grabbing them, especially if they're a little bit bigger. If you can give me an Alabama running back, either from Alabama or in the NFL, that's about 220, 230 pounds, and we think that he's at least on the good side of age and everything else. Let me tell you something. That's what they lack. If you look at these playoffs, these teams all have a running back. All of them. They all have a strong running back. They don't all have Derrick Henry because there's only one of them. He's the king. But there's a great running back everywhere in the NFL for the teams that are really, really good. And Dallas Cowboys this year, and I don't know, you might even be able to go back a few. You can't even name who their running backs are. And they used to be one of the very best, right? Ezekiel Elliott and all these other great running backs. Nobody. They don't have anybody right now on that roster who's a good running back.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, especially, and these things do swing back and forth, folks, just like the market, the NFL. Oh, it's, we got to put all these rules in to make the passing game more exciting. And then the side of the ball that Pete and I played on, at least primarily on defense. Pete was a running back also, by the way. But when you're playing defense, what do you got to do if the other team's passing all the time? Got to get linebackers that run 4.4 and 4.55. Those guys don't weigh 265.
No,
They weigh 220 or 215 because they can get into the passing lane and disrupt passes. Well, they're not going to be able to stand up to King Henry, Pete. And we've seen that like last week with the Steelers, when even though they usually have a pretty stout defense, they had no answer for Henry last week. That's why he went for over 160, I think, on his own.
I think it was 186. And by the way, he might have the most lethal strong arm, freaking straight arm on players, man. I mean, he takes these guys at 220 pounds and just throws them off to the side and keeps going. He's a beast. There's only one of him, but there's a lot of guys behind him, like Gibbs and some of these other guys that are great running backs as well.
Yeah, Jamar Gibbs. I mean, all he did against the Vikes was 4 touchdowns, Pete.
Yeah, that's
4. Ouch.